how far does Stalinism still exist in Russia?
Well, you see, Stalinism is not a theory. Stalinism is a habit of treating people. I think it exists to quite a large extent in the party apparatus. Khrushchev has done a lot to counteract it, but of course he's always limited by the fact that if he goes too far, the whole thing might blow up. I think he's always afraid of that, rightly or wrongly.
What differences might there be in the world today if Stalin was still alive?
Well, there'd be very substantial differences inside Russia, of course. I think there's no doubt that Stalin was preparing another of his great purges just before he died. So far as the world itself is concerned, I should think, well, it's very difficult to say, but I should think that if he hadn't pursued his essentially inflexible policy, there would have been a very good chance of war. Very good chance of war. I think it's also possible that Stalin would have been more successful than his successor has been in keeping the communist bloc together, which means that we should have been presented with a much solider menace, a much solider front, which possibly could only have been resolved by war. Beyond that, I shouldn't like to speculate.
But in the field of internal rather than foreign affairs, what have been the most significant changes since Khrushchev took over?
Well, they've been enormous, of course, in all sorts of respects. I should say the most striking thing of all, particularly the thing from the point of view of the man inside Russia, is the fact that people have been given some kind of sense of not living under this permanent pressure of terror. Stalin really did maintain a tremendous umbrella of terror over everyone. I think that's gone. I haven't been to the country. I can only speak in a sense from what I hear and from the enormous amount that now appears in the press. But it's definitely, one has the sense of it being a more relaxed country.
Yet, if I may interrupt, 4 rag and bone men were condemned to death today for private enterprise.
Yes, I was about to qualify it and say that these things are relative. The things are relative in the sense that while there isn't the same overall terror, there is still, of course, a very severe regime, and a regime which is as fully prepared, when necessary, to use arbitrary methods. The only thing is that it doesn't do it quite so often. If the chances of being condemned as a rag and bone man for speculating, or as a pieman for pinching a bit of the fat or whatever it was the other day, if the chances of that are considerably reduced, then there is a sense of relaxation. The arbitrary element is still very strong. Yes, all that's true. But there is a kind of sense that the government is not entirely indifferent to what people want. There is a sense that there is a recognition of the fact that Stalin's straitjacket was really inefficient as well as irrational.
Would you say, though, that the government are more rational, for example, in their treatment of artists, when non-conforming writers can still be confined to lunatic asylums?
Well, you see, again, these things are relative. Certainly non-conforming writers, provided they're not well known, can be confined to lunatic asylums. If they're well known, they wouldn't, I think, do that now because they're much more sensitive to what the outside world thinks about them. Yes, that's true. But if you look at it from the point of view of the writer, you see, let me stress, these things are relative. If you compare the position of the writer in the Soviet Union with the position of the writer in this country, well, of course, he's in no sense free. If you compare him with the dismal period under Stalin, well, then I think he probably feels that he is at last in a position to do something. He's got to maneuver, he's got to be frightfully careful. He's got to possibly wait a very long time, like this chap Solzhenitsyn, who I understand had to wait 4 years till he could get his story published. Some people have been successful in smuggling their manuscripts out and getting them published abroad. Now, those things remind me much more of what was happening in the 20s. It's not a liberal regime, let's not kid ourselves about that. But it is something which, when compared to that ghastly lunatic asylum that Stalin's regime was, is something that more approximates to human life. You see, for one thing, even the fact that the party now allows people to tell the truth about the past is an enormous difference. Of course, the real difference will come when people are allowed tell the truth about the present. Still, that hasn't happened yet, but even to tell the truth about the past is already a tremendous advance in terms of humanity as compared with 10 years ago. Of course, the obvious one, science, tremendous advance in science, which I think has been due, as much as anything else, to the liberation of science to a very large extent from the party straitjacket. They're learning the value of freedom, which they perhaps don't believe in theoretically and in practice.
Has this been applied in other fields besides defense?
Not much, no. It's really primarily applied in science. Industry is still very much over-controlled, over-planned, I would say, over-centralized. But of course, in industry, too, there has been a fairly steady growth throughout the 10 years. No doubt about that at all. Agriculture, well, agriculture is not so successful for the simple reason, I think, that agriculture, in a sense, is less adapted to the communist large-scale, over-centralized planning. Agriculture is not in the catastrophic state it was that Stalin left it in, but it certainly hasn't made the progress that industry has made. There's been a general, I think, probably from the point of view of the individual, apart from the satisfaction of Sputniks and the other marvels of science, there has been, I think, a steady rise in the standard of living. It's still very low compared, say, with this country, but there has undoubtedly been a rise. Pensions, social security, all things of that kind have undoubtedly improved.
In general, Mr. Schapiro, how far does the attitude of mind called Stalinism still exist in Russia?
Well, you see, Stalinism is not a theory. Stalinism is a habit of treating people. I think it exists to quite a large extent in the party apparatus. It's fair to say that Khrushchev has done what he can or done a lot to counteract it, but of course he's always limited by the fact that if he goes too far, the whole thing might blow up. I think he's always afraid of that, rightly or wrongly. But I think he has tried to curb and dismiss and, generally speaking, keep in check the sort of people who wanted to carry on with the old methods. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There are probably quite a lot of them left. I think it's been a terrible lesson. I think it's been learnt pretty deeply. I think people at all levels, including the highest levels, which are the ones that matter, have realized now, when it's perhaps rather late, but they've nevertheless realized what a disaster it was to let one man get that tremendous power. So I think one can say, these things are always conjectural, that it won't come back. The instruments for bringing it back are still there. The party control is still there. The police still has its powers. There's not very much development of real rule of law in any sense, so that it's possible for it to come back, but I think it's unlikely.